freedom of the city of Edinburgh is never given lightly, and is not given very often. It's over 20 years since anybody was given the freedom of the city, and there are only 5 living people who have the honour at the moment, and they include the Queen.
When I was first approached about it, I didn't really understand the historical significance of it. 1465, I think it started. People from admirals and kings and queens and princes, names like David Livingstone, Ben Franklin, Ben Jonson. It's an amazing list. Looking through it all, I think I was the first from Fountain Bridge. When I went to England, that was my first move away. And then in '74, when I moved out of England to go non-resident, that was my second move. But home is really where you're working, if you work as much as I do. My wife, she's very much for where I want to do, where I want to go. She's very supportive, and she really made this whole place here in Spain what it is.
We would prefer really to have only one place. We became resident in the Bahamas, so we bought a house in the Bahamas, which is a lovely house. We have an apartment in Los Angeles because we spend a lot of time in Los Angeles for Sean's work. We are now resident in Monte Carlo. Mainly our house is here. I rebuilt the whole thing along the years with a mason and 3 men. I did the architecture myself. It was great fun for me. I decided for Christmas to give to Sean a happening, and I had exactly 3 months to do it. He was at the time doing The Untouchable in Chicago. So I brought him in here on the Christmas Eve, on the 24th. He was coming back from the plane, from the airport, and I brought him here. I said, I made a happening for you. And Jason, Stefan, Hassan Mohamed came here. And I had covered the door with the ribbon and the fan and the roses and so on. And I said, well, what do you think of it? And he said, oh, that's very beautiful. I said, okay, rip it down. He said, what do you mean? I said, yes, it's a happening, you rip it down. So he came, turned it, and he saw Happy Christmas, Sean. And he said, oh, it's a door, you made another terrace, because before there was a little window. And I said, well, open it. So he opened it. And here was this dressing room and bathroom where he spent at least 2 hours a day. And he was like a little boy. He was really so happy. We come from totally different backgrounds. Sean is, as you know, from a very poor background, and I can say I come from a very wealthy background. In North Africa, you have a lot of poor people, in Morocco, in Tunisia, where I was living. But it sounds very strange to say that, but he was the really first one that I met who was very, very poor when he was a young person.
Fountain Bridge It evokes so many crazy kind of memories going back. Originally then we had gaslight in the stairs. And you know, there were, I think, 6 floors or 7 floors, all the way up with 4. It's only a room and kitchen. Some of them were 9 in a family. I don't know how they all fitted in, but they did. There was, in that whole street, no hot water, to my knowledge, except for the swimming baths.
But it wasn't until later on, when we were a bit older, that we became much more aware of the actual circumstances that my father lived in. And I remember once saying, geez, that my feet are hanging over the back of the bed, and he said, you know, he used to live in a chest of drawers in Fountain Bridge till he got too big, but for a long time he was in a chest of drawers, and it sort of brought it home.
Well, I started when I was 9 at Kennedy's Dairy. I don't know if it's still there. And I worked every day until I went there in the morning before we went to school. Even if you got wet, you had to sit with the wet clothes in the school. You didn't tell the teacher. And that was at Brunsfield School. All right, who's first? Eh? Well, is it any good here? Yes. Really? What a difference.
And this is Brunsfield School with all the children playing outside.
It's terrific.
And this is the area of Toll Cross, as you would know it when you were
Yeah.
a boy.
Yeah.
Before we had Goldbergs, we even managed to get a tram.
Well, I think it's terrific. Yeah, that's great. Great. Thank you all very much.
Now, some of them would like to ask you some questions, Mr. Connery. Is that,
Of course.
Is that all right?
Sure.
Or no?
When you were young, were you good or bad?
When you were young, were you good or bad?
It's a good question. It depends what you're talking about. At school, I was, well, not enthusiastic enough, and that was a mistake. But I've made up for it since.
Did your mother wanted you to be an actor when you were young?
No, when I was young and where I lived in Fountain Bridge, you really had to try and get a trade.
He was a lot younger than I expected.
He was not like a film star, he was quite ordinary.
His voice was really Scottish and deep.
So, but my mother was more enthusiastic about that direction than the one I took. But she never bothered much, really.
Right, one more question. Tom.
On average, what's your yearly income?
On average, my yearly income. Well, as nobody had any curiosity about my yearly income when I was on the brew here, I never discussed it with anybody.
I think you're quite right.
Good question.
I thought he was wonderful. I didn't think he would come to the school. I liked his Scottish accent, and he was just a nice person to meet. He was more sort of down to earth and everything. Well, I didn't want to wash it ever again because I shook hands with him.
It's only in retrospect you realize that there is any kind of deprivation. And by then it's too late to do anything about it. It's already happened. By 9, the war had come. Scholastically, everything suffered because they closed the schools for fear of bombings. So we went to people's houses, and they said to me, you can't really come in here. So it was okay to deliver the milk, but it wasn't okay to come and be taught in their houses. And then I left school at 13, so as far as qualifications to have jobs, I had zilch.
Some actors have very clever PR people to invent legends for themselves, you know, with all sorts of exotic backgrounds and upbringings. And he never did any of that. I always remember going to a lunch and sitting next to him, and he held the table enthralled for at least half an hour, telling us how to polish a coffin. You know, this was one of the early jobs he did as a kid when he worked for an undertaker in Edinburgh. And he would quite easily tell you everything about his humble early life, especially the fact that he never got an education.
I was at the Art College in Edinburgh.
There was the moment when I realized he'd entered the world of the arts. And there he was in the world of the arts. But not as an artist, not as an actor, as my model. He was an artist model. And he was 19. He was too beautiful for words. A virtual Adonis.
I've been down in London for the Mr. Universe contest to represent Scotland in the tall man's class. I heard about these auditions for South Pacific, and they were going out for a year.
There is nothing like a day, nothing in the world. There is nothing you can name that is anything like a day.
Josh Logan was casting South Pacific, and he gave a call for English chorus boys to come and sing There's Nothing Like a Dame, which had less than the ring of truth about it. And so he wanted some burlier, heavier guys, so he sent talent scouts around all the gymnasiums to get some, big, hefty guys, and they came upon Sean. And the first Saturday night that he was in South Pacific, there was a party, and I was at the party, and that's when he walked in, and we introduced ourselves to each other. I was secretly rather grateful to find someone with an accent, a working class accent, and attitude, and I think possibly secretly he was more relaxed with me than he would have been with other types of actors in the room.
It was an adventure in a way, and I was being paid, I think, like £14 a week. There was no future in it for me, I thought. And then we were in Manchester for 10 weeks over Christmas time with a soccer team in the show. I played there, and they offered me the terms at Manchester United and everything, and I was only 22 then. Matt Busby was terrific to us. And I thought, God, what a chance. He offered me trials to sign on. And this man in the play was called Robert Henderson, said to me, I think you should seriously consider being an actor. And I said, well, what would I have to do? He said, well, you'd have to give yourself an education and everything. So he gave me these 10 books. Well, it's not just 10 books, 10 titles.
I must say the reading list today seems appallingly difficult for someone who wasn't used to reading books. It included Proust, James Joyce, the works of Stanislavski with all his theories of acting, and a great many more. And for 2 years, he persevered. And whenever he was touring with South Pacific, he'd go to the local library and get out some of these books to read. Now, I admired that.
When I got into it, I realized how much I really enjoyed it. And it was like a whole new world to me. I'd always been very keen on reading, and I'd gone right out of it when I went through that phase at the school when the schools were closed.
Well, I thought that he would make it much more than I would. I mean, I was really on my uppers, and he had a good job in the show, and although it was his first part, I thought Sean would fit the bill greatly if British films ever changed like American films and did adventurous, masculine, macho heroes, of which there were very few at that time made, British films. It was always about bunties having a party and everybody playing tennis and things and running in and out of French windows, which Sean didn't look like he could do. And lo and behold, British films did change. You can't, unless you have a massive, massive hit like that, make international stardom. You can become very famous in your own country, you can become very famous in Europe, you can become very famous in America. With Bond, you see, with an action film, you become famous in every nation in the world.
To waylay 007, the Japanese press besieged the Tokyo Hilton. But there's Cubby to the rescue, standing up for his hungry hero.
He hasn't even had his lunch right now. He had to go back up to his room because he didn't have the privacy of having a little lunch. Now, he's an actor.
The Bond thing was very difficult to handle. I mean, you can't imagine the demand for pictures and interviews and things. I mean, you can't believe where they were coming from. Everywhere you went, in the toilets, in the street, off the set.
On You Only Live Twice, they were shooting on the Ginza in Tokyo. It was a simple scene where Sean was to walk down a street where he was being followed by a female agent. Sean got out of the car, walked like 4 steps, and was mobbed. And of course, Sean being Sean, went, sky high, a total explosion of temper or whatever. But it was very difficult, and the period in Japan particularly, where it was 68 and 5 Bonds had been made and he was known everywhere, and Deanne and Sean were fighting to make their marriage work, and as she describes it as well, it was intolerable.
Everywhere you go, you can't be by yourself at all, really, because there's always someone coming out from behind a tree or big eyes from everywhere. And I think that, I feel it myself. I don't like being stared at all the time.
It's the invasion of one's privacy, and I don't believe any of the rubbish about the price of fame or all that sort of jazz. I don't go for that at all.
My mother, she couldn't take it, let alone Sean take it. She couldn't feel that this person who's making world news was her son. Very proud, though, but extremely shy and embarrassed. More so when she went to the hairdresser, and sometimes she would say Mrs. McLean rather than Mrs. Connery. Book in her maiden name.
The Bond for him, of course, was the making of him. But then also with an ongoing character, you have a two-edged sword. So that you then had the thing of losing your own personality. When they saw him, they said, James Bond. I was with him in the street 1,000 times. And he said, James Bond. Nobody ever said Sean Connery.
There was an imbalance in terms of reception by people that saw the movies. They adored the movies, and then, so no film you could do, no matter how good it was, could possibly compete with the next James Bond film. It was very frustrating for, different reasons, and I have to be careful what I say legally, because I've been in the courts for 30 years with these guys.
When you look at his earnings from the Bond movies, and you look at the fact that those movies have been seen by 1 in 3 people on the planet, so he felt rightfully, I think, that he wasn't properly paid for Bond. You see that he was paid £5,000 or £6,000 for Dr. No. 2 years later for Goldfinger, he'd pushed it up to 50,000 plus a percentage, and the estimated earning on Goldfinger was, I think, in its first year or its second year, was something like $20 million on the with its American release, and it was on the cover of Life magazine and everything. It was the big deal.
So I got out as soon as I could, and then I went back only to do Diamonds Are Forever, only because I did it on my terms, and I got the kind of fee that I thought one should have had, and I had it paid before I made the movie. Anybody who claims that they knew it was going to be a success are lying. Nobody knew. I did one in '62 and then one 25 years later, which is really amazing.
Mr. Connery gets a bunch of mail, especially around Christmas and Easter, and the mailbox is just overflowing. The poor mailman, he comes on a scooter, and sometimes he just can't handle it. The letters come from all over the world, from Australia, Germany, Czechoslovakia, you name it. Connery residence, good afternoon. The agency didn't tell me who I was going to work for. He's not here. And when I had to come for the interview, they said, well, right, you know, we have to tell you who you're going to go work for. And they said, it's James Bond. I said, oh my God, you know, but, you know, it worked out well. As a boss, he likes everything to be spelled out. And he's very kind and everything, but he expects me to be very efficient.
We met, Sean and I, during an international tournament in Morocco. And it was love at first sight for the two of us.
Diamonds are forever.
He won the prize of the men, and I won the prize of the women. When the prize evening came, we danced the whole night.
They won't leave in the night.
It was in 1970, on the 13th of March exactly. I was married, he was married, his wife was in Spain, and my husband was playing golf with the King of Morocco. And after that, in 1 year, we met twice. John said one day to me, I'm basically very serious, and I don't want to play game with you. And that was really the beginning of what is now our life.
Voilà le petit mandat, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà ici. Merci. I have made a lot of portraits of Sean and sketch and so on, but this one, I tried to give an impression. I wanted to give an impression that is very much the way I see Sean. He's so massive, but when I say massive, it's like a big mountain of a man, especially I'm tiny. I think he's very sexy. I think for me, when I met him, he was the most exotic person I met in my life. Women are crazy about him, and even now they are after him like it's unbelievable. I remember in the Philippines, all the girls, and God, they are beautiful there. They were after him. You know, they were all in awe of him. And so on. So a journalist asked me, how are you, how can you keep a man like that? And I said, well, I'm exhausted, I'm near collapsing, and I was, they said, no, you're joking, tell us how you can keep, and I said, well, my secret, tell me your secret. And I said, my secret is I'm irresistible, what can I say? I always wanted to make a portrait of Sean's mother. I thought she had a great attitude and great posture, and she had a marvelous face and very interesting. And so she posed for me in the sitting room downstairs. She was very upright, as you can see. And I don't think she was enamored of the result, but Sean loved it, thought it was very much her. She was a very strong lady. I think she was very tough with herself first, and very reserved and very private. I'm convinced she was very proud of him, but she would never say it. That was not her way of saying, of praising. She was not a praising woman. As a husband, he's not the orthodox, normal husband, I would say. In the way that he's very much of a loner. He needs me, no doubt, I think, but he needs also his privacy, very much so. He never had been as happy as he had been when I built that bungalow that you saw at the end of the garden.
It was a small house that she's redesigned so that it's completely self-contained. It has, it's cooking and sleeping and a shower and all my own music and stuff, on my own reading stuff. And when I get a script that I like, then I go down to the down there, and that's when I start to take it apart and work it through. I never kept anything. I moved around a lot anyway. I didn't have any photographs or anything of where I'd been or what I had done. It was Jackie Collins the other day and Leslie Brickers. Jackie always has a bunch of the British crowd, and we were in LA. And they got talking about it, and Jackie said, well, what do you Xerox your scripts? And I said, Xerox my scripts for what? She said, well, what do you do with the originals? I said, I don't know where they are. I said, I've never kept a script in my life. And I think I've done 60 movies or 55 movies, I don't know. It never occurred to me to keep them.
He really was restless, and he kept no material possessions around him. He was drifting all the time. Nothing really mattered much to him. Michelin kind of focused things up, and Michelin was the homemaker and gave him a sense of the delight of family life that hadn't been in the first 40 years of his life.
I think Spain is a wonderful refuge for Dad, where he can actually go and sort of relax, go and play golf sometimes, or just stay at home, log fire in the winter and things. So there is an element of him cutting himself off, but I don't think it's such a bad thing.
When you're an actor, it's geography. I think he suffered more than I did, funnily enough, because I went to live in Hollywood, where I have masses of friends. I lived all my life in London. You know, I've only lived in the two places. He went to live in Spain, which is a place where he doesn't even speak the language. So I think he has suffered. He had lived really quite isolated in Marbella, and he thought nobody cared. When the BAFTA award came, there were all these people there who come there just for him and to honor him and to do it sincerely. And he suddenly realized, and it was a changing point in his life, he suddenly realized that all these people really did care about him.
It's absolutely magic that they're honoring you in this sycophantic fashion. And if I would be allowed, I'd like to embarrass you even further. I think you're the nicest man on earth, if not the entire universe.
Afterwards, he said to me, I don't know why I've locked myself away in Marbella. He said, it's so much fun with everybody, we're all here.
I've had 30 years filmic odyssey and met some really marvelous people. But what became apparent watching it this evening was I had not seen them as much as I should have.
And it seemed like he wasted a lot of his years not being with us all.
Were I here the whole evening, I couldn't do it justice. Thank you.
Chairman, Lord Provost, Mr. and Mrs. Connery, ladies and gentlemen, the old hometown looked the same when Sean stepped down from the plane. But looking back on it now, Sean, I think it's fair to say that we were disadvantaged. We grew up in an area of social deprivation. Yeah. But in those days, of course, we didn't have social workers to tell us that. Consequently, we were as happy as pigs. Men who make it big often have their name linked to a region, Lawrence of Arabia, Scud of the Antarctic, Clive of India. Tonight we have Connery of Edinburgh.
when I go to Scotland. It's a very emotional time for me because the amount of people that I know dwindles each year as I get older. When I left Scotland, I lost contact with most people because, well, I just was never back enough.
Today's Scotsman reminded us of what the film director Terry Young said about Sean, with the exception of Lassie. With the exception of Lassie, he's the only person I know who has never been spoiled by success.
Everybody is marked by his childhood, but him particularly, I think. And he was very poor, and that nobody really helped him when he was a little boy. And so he's very concerned about young people who have to be helped.
One of the things he doesn't like is people talking about the Sean Connery Trust.
We begin here. It's October 1965. The receivers are in at Fairfield Shipyard, bankrupt. The 9th yard to go bust on the Clyde. Harland and Wolff, one of the proud names in Clyde shipbuilding, is a graveyard. And there are others. Henderson, Simon Lognitz, Blytheswood, Hamilton, Ingalls, Denny's of Dumbarton. These shipyards have gone under with millions.
Well, we have to go back to the early days of Fairfields, which was a social technological experiment that took place in Glasgow from 1965 till 1968. This was widely talked about at that time. In fact, it actually produced the documentary, The Bull and the Bunnet.
And to the worker's bitter eye, the situation looks clear. The boss takes the gravy when the going is good, and when things look bad, he sells out and takes his money and vanishes. And that's the crux. The gulf is complete. The gulf between the bowler and the bunnet.
Sean, genuinely, in his questioning way, was wondering if it was all a con game.
What we've introduced here at Fairfields is a technique known as management services.
Were we, the big businessmen, the top engineers, were we conning the workers? Well, of course, that was not the case, as the experiment clearly proved.
Now at Fairfields, the management considered the shop stewards a vital part of the structure. Gave them an office.
Sean and myself, and various other people, had the thought that maybe there was something else we should be doing. And so the whole concept of the Scottish International Education Trust arose from that. It really arose from the Fairfields days.
And that's when I did Diamonds Are Forever. They had been asking me to go back and do it, and I'd turned them down. And suddenly I realized, well, here was a golden opportunity. I could sign for 18 weeks, and for 18 weeks' work, it would give $1 million tax-free.
Which worked out about £440,000, if my arithmetic is correct. And that was really the first big start we got. And from then, we have never looked back. The minutes of the last meeting, gentlemen, can we have these approved?
He collected trustees who had great Scottish traits in them, great personal pride in the country, and the frustration of recognising that most of our great talent goes out of the country for a variety of different reasons.
Some more prominent Scots who may not
We
necessarily...
make about 20 awards a year to young people in Scotland of exceptional talent and indications of excellence. And they can go from a few £100s to big projects where we're supporting people up to, say, £10,000 on particular projects. All the people we award grants to are Scottish or of Scottish origin, Scottish parents, or even Scottish grandparents. This was always driven by the fact that Sean always wanted to see Scotland being something different.
We should be more supportive of the home product. It is nationalistic, specifically that.
It's up to you. If you want to change Scotland, phone the Scottish National Party now.
And last week we had the other parties in Scotland shaken, stirred and panicked when 007 turned his sights on the Scottish question.
What's amazing to me about the whole thing is, why is there such a furore? What is it that they're frightened of, whoever they are, whether they are Labour, Conservative, Liberal? What are they frightened of? Surely the principle of democracy is choice. The furore is interesting. For somebody who is as private as I am, but happens to be a public figure, I'm a very easy target.
As for Sean Connery, well, he's done more, much more for Scotland in financial and in many, many other ways than every single Tory Labour MP in Scotland put together and multiplied by 10.
I think that in Scotland, they don't have enough fire about their freedom to make it count. Good afternoon. There's a couple of things that got up my nose a little this morning in the Scotsman, in the article relating to this chap wanting to know what I give to charity. Well, to give an example of how difficult the answer is, that there's a film called Prince of Thieves. Kevin Costner, who's become a rather good friend of mine, asked me to play a day in his film. And I said, well, it would really have to be something very interesting for me to want to do it. And so it was to play King Richard, the very last. It's only half a page. Anyway, I then made a decision that I would do it for, said, $250,000 if I could give it to a charity. And it's equally distributed 4 ways between SIET, Heriot Watts, St Andrews University, and Dundee Cancer. And the way it read, it was as though one was getting 250 and professing to be giving to charity. Another inference by somebody was that I don't pay taxes, which is entirely untrue. And I pay full tax in Britain, in America, wherever I work, with none of the benefits of living in the country. And I just like that matter cleared up. And again, you can ask any question you want, and I'll decide whether it's your business or not.
He can be difficult with the press. You know, when you've had the pressure that he's said over the years, I mean, how many times can you tell a newspaper man your life story? After, the first year, it must have become incredibly tedious.
It's not possible to look there and there. Even you can. Is there any chance?
The only thing that is important about money to Sean is you don't interfere with his rights. That is where the suing comes in. I'm not really much of a suer. That's the wrong word, isn't it? Some of the critics said I'm a suer, but then Sean sues. He has sued every company in Hollywood, I should think, at some time or the other.
In the case of The Man Who Would Be King, the John Huston film that he made with Michael Caine, he felt that the movie accounts hadn't been properly tallied and he hadn't been paid what was due to him in his percentage of the gross. And he sued. He was suing for a small amount of money, a couple of $100,000. There was a countersuit launched against him and Caine for $22 million. And that would, of course, have destroyed him. And he acknowledged that. He spoke about it in the press, and Caine spoke about it. But it was a point of principle. He was being underpaid by, and dodgy accountants were at work. And he wouldn't accept that. He wouldn't accept that abuse, the abuse that is part of the industry. And he sued and won.
In fact, I think law should be in school. I think you should be taught law on a par with religion. Especially in Scotland, because, my God, we've got our own law. And why they don't do it, I'll never understand. It would be a terrific service to the people. It would cut out a lot of the charlatans who take advantage of poor people who don't understand it.
People treat him as though he has no sensitivity because of the way he looks. But there is an extraordinarily sensitive man behind that. extraordinarily sensitive, more sensitive than you could ever imagine. Ever imagine. I mean, so sensitive that I wouldn't even embarrass him by describing it.
Sean doesn't like big parties, and we never received many people. So I decided to give a big surprise party, and there was 150 people. All the stars of Hollywood were there, Spielberg and Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, Stallone, Sidney Poitier, Robert Wagner, I mean, everybody. There was a big banner that I put at the end of the restaurant on which was written, "The 60th of the sexiest." And suddenly he understood, and he turned to go to the door, so I had to catch him by the hand and say, "Hey, I'll give you a surprise party for you, and please, please." And he came, and then suddenly there was a gypsy violin, and then there was a bagpipe and drummer. That moves him so much, always. And he began to say something to the people, to thank them to be here and thank me. And then he went to cry in a corner because he couldn't continue.
Sometimes I'm very surprised. I mean, when I did Journey's End on the first night in London, and it went very well, and he came into my dressing room and he was completely, he was crying then and I was crying, and it was a wonderful moment. We hugged each other.
I think he's about the best listener that I know. He listens very, very carefully, and he is extremely caring, although he'll never show it to your face. You'll often hear sort of second-hand information. Yeah, he's very, very concerned about getting this and that together. He is certainly a very honest person. I think because he had a difficult childhood, I think he finds it quite difficult to be emotionally very open.
It was the 60th Oscar night, and as he arrived, a British nominee got a very warm welcome.
The one, the only, Mr. Sean Connery!
That was a great moment for him. I mean, you'd never get him to say it, but believe me, he was so delighted. I bet you'd never get him to tell you, but I bet you it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to him. And I'll tell you the greatest thing that happened to him, which shook him to the core, and he never realized it was going to happen. When he came on to get his Oscar, he got a standing ovation from the cream of Hollywood.
Sean Connery and the entire...
I've never seen anyone get that. The special award at the end is always the standing ovation. Sean got a standing ovation for a Best Supporting Actor Oscar. I bet you nobody's ever done that. And you know what else he is? I mean, for all this tough guy James Bond, he's a terrible hypochondriac. Whenever I see him, you say to someone, "How are you?" And so, "I'm fine, how are you?" "Fine." And it's just a sort of, you ask Sean how he is, and he tells you. He says, "I've got this pain here. I've got to see the doctor tomorrow. I've just got rid of this cold, and I've sprained my finger just here. I can't play golf." And he always seems to have something wrong with him. It's all imaginary, but he's got this thing about that.
We both went to have a full medical for insurance. And I remember the guy saying, "Well, I'm going to take a blood sample." This is a while ago now. And the guy pulled out the needle, and Dad just sort of almost passed out. And I was laughing so much, I hardly felt the needle go in. I was up. And as he gets a bit sort of woozy when he thinks about all that kind of stuff.
My voice is in pieces at the moment. It sounds as though one's, complaining all the time, but I was doing the family business in New York, and suddenly I had laryngitis, it sounded like. And if I hadn't gone to an extra ultra specialist, I probably would have still thought I had laryngitis. But this guy put a thing up my nose, down my throat, and looked and scared the hell out of me, saying, "Well, I've never seen anything like this before." And it turned out it was like polyps, which singers get, but it was only on the one side. So then I took 3 other opinions, and then I had it treated in America, And then I went back and I had to have it done 3-month checkups, and then a 6-month checkup. And the last checkup is 6 months ago in June. I'm having it done when I go to London. And everything seems to be in order.
Inevitably, there has to be a decline, doesn't there? You know, it's happened to Paul Newman, and it must happen to Sean. Age gets everybody in the end. I would guess he's got maybe another couple of years of major leading roles, and he will either chuck it in and concentrate on his golf handicap, or he'll go into important character roles and round off his very long career now. I mean, he's been a movie actor for 30 years, and round it off that way.
He was a major young star, a major middle-aged star. Now he's a major 60-year-old star, and he will remain that way for the next 10 to 15 years.
Sean will work until he feels like working. And if he's interested and fascinated by what he's doing, which he's doing for the moment, then he will continue. Also, he says, I don't know what to do else except playing golf.
I don't think there's anything more revealing than playing golf. I think that the overcoming of one's temperament and succeeding in any measure at golf is a great achievement. I would like to still be able to play golf all my life. Well, I want to grow old. I don't want to grow old, actually, but I find that there is nothing I can do about it.
It's nothing to do with age. It's just not a question of years. It's a question of youth inside, and you have it or you don't. And Sean, old man, does mean nothing.
Diamonds are forever.
I played I shot 80.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's what, what cassou?
Old is in the eyes of other people who count their years. Yes.
I certainly don't want to be invalid. No way. I would rather take a pill. But I'm not thinking of taking the pill yet.
Congratulations. Great.
Well done, Sam. Right.
Congratulations.
I know you.
Well, my mother's new message, Larry, a long time ago.
Unbelievable. I didn't expect the reception that we had at the Usher Hall in the street. It was really so moving.
I know, Fountain Bridge neighbour.
It's only 8,000 here.
I know.
I have to go now. I have to go.
I was very worried for Sean because he was very nervous about the idea of delivering the speech to all those people.
Freedom of Edinburgh. It has a marvellous ring to it, and I'm more than proud to accept such a great honour. As most of you know, I was born in Edinburgh. When I was first informed about the possibility of receiving the Freedom of Edinburgh, I knew then I would not be able to express my full thanks adequately in words. I can tell you how I feel. I feel like I've gone 15 rounds with Mike Tyson, but I won. Edinburgh, I thank you.
Sean Connery stars in tonight's late film on 4, a powerful sci-fi epic from director John Borman, offering an extraordinary view of a future world. Zardoz at 12:40.
Frankie Howard, hero
In the future, to Zardoz.